Hi, everyone.
Hello. We've reached Genesis 2, verses 18 to 25, the last section of Genesis chapter 2, from the NIV.
The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds of the air and all the beasts of the field. But for Adam no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame."
Verse 24, the ESV says, "A man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife," which has more, I think, the direct message of covenant commitment. The covenant commitment of God to humans is now the covenant commitment of the first two humans to each other and to the human race, their children and beyond. So I thought Henri Belloches, in the first quote we have in the study, makes a connection you wouldn't make if you were a Jehovah's Witness, which is the connection between the personal name of God, which we've said is introduced in this chapter, Yahweh, and this covenant commitment, even this marriage of the first man and woman. So here's Belloches' quote.
In the second tablet of Genesis, God is no longer called simply God, as in the first, but YHWH, God. Why? The Tetragrammaton, YHWH, which derives from the verb to be, and was doubtless pronounced Yahweh, replaced by the Lord, when read in the synagogue, in order to avoid the slightest risk of profanity, plays the role of God's personal name. This is the name God bears when he comes and visits his people and makes a covenant with them. This is his covenant name, his name for his marriage with Israel.
And of course we're referring here, Belloches is, to the Exodus passage that we're familiar with as witnesses, that God says, "By my name I was not made known to them, I was made known by the name El Shaddai." Now he's saying that this revelation of the name here is like unto that, in that the personal name of God is now attached to the personal relationship he has with two human beings. As later it will be related to the marital relationship he has with Israel.
Yeah, and I mean, Genesis is part of the Pentateuch, which was written for Israel or directed to them.
Yeah, so whether it be 2 or 2 million, as it probably was at the time of the Exodus, something like 2 million Israelites, God is covenantly committed to this nation as he was to the first two human beings. And we miss that connection between the name of God and his personal relationship.
Intimacy.
Intimacy with the believer.
Right.
And of course, as witnesses, you have no intimate relationship with God. You're, as it were, hanging onto the skirts of the spiritual Israelites, right? Is the way you conceive it. Aristotle is generally considered to be the brightest light of the ancient world, the greatest philosopher and the greatest scientific thinker of his era, 400 years or so before Christ. We shouldn't miss the difference between what the brightest light of the Greek world, the pagan world, thought of woman and what this text says about woman. It's obvious that man and woman are made in the image of God in chapter 1, and here they are brought together in a equal relationship, which yet is complementary relationship. And so equality in the Bible has to do with nature, not with status and a lot of other things that we tend to equate with equality if we're thinking like the modern mind. Aristotle, though, says basically that woman is created with a different nature and therefore is inferior to man, which is very, very common concept in the ancient world. So we shouldn't take for granted the basic equality of man and woman as plainly stated in these 2 chapters. This is what Belloches also says about the complementarity principle, though, in that he's, of course, referring especially to the verse 18, where it says, I will make him a helper fit for him. Belloches says, if the Apostle Paul adds man is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man, it is the fruit of his reflection on the order. He does not deprive the woman as a human being of the glory of being as the image of God, but he observes that in the relationship of the sexes, the privilege of authority, which represents God, rests on the side of the male. If we may be permitted the comment, there is a kind of subtle balance. In all earthly relationships, the man represents God more obviously than does the woman. Some of us are getting mad already, right?
I'm sure.
In active transcendency, in keeping an objective distance, in leadership, and in work, these are the ways man more obviously represents God. But then he says, but we realize at once that it is the woman who best represents humanity in its relationship with God. In the face-to-face relationship with the Lord, every human being, male or female, must accept a feminine position. I don't remember ever thinking about that as a witness. All of us, therefore, male or female, must accept a feminine position in relation to the Lord, existing from him and for him, receiving and bearing the seed of his word, receiving and bearing the name he gives. And the 3 things that remain, faith, hope, and love, in 1 Corinthians 13, have they not all a feminine fragrance? Well did the Creator weigh the respective advantages of the male and the female. The scales are less unequal than is supposed. Each one of us, man and woman, finds it easier to live one dimension of the human portion, being as the image of God. One represents him, one corresponds to him.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be people who are seething right now with this comment, but I think it's because we're so influenced by today's society's thinking. I see it all over the place, where it seems to be we're in competition. Male and female are in competition with one another. Whereas I don't think this was ever the intention. The intention is complementary. And if we stopped thinking in terms of wanting to be on top, it's not even just wanting to be equal. I think a lot of women want to be above. It goes against the reason male and female exist.
Yeah.
That they are to be complementary to one another.
And that complementarity doesn't end with the man and the woman either. It has to do with the children. I mean, who doubts that although father and mother have authority over children, who's serving whom?
Yeah, it's parents serve the children. The husband serves the wife. He's given the duty of being the spiritual lead in the family. That is an obligation that's put on him by God. So that's he's serving the family, and the wife serves the husband as well.
And yeah, that's true.
Everyone is serving.
We all serve in a different way, though.
Yeah, and I think the idea of the feminine being the church, being in the feminine role, is because we're called the bride of Christ.
Yeah, we all serve Christ.
Yeah,
but
and he
really serves us.
Yes, he does.
So the complementarity principle binds us all together in love, right?
And if the model is Christ as head, then you're going to get away from this idea of, well, why should the man be the head of the family, and why is Christ the head? And if he's the model, if you are a head, then he's your model. It should be a good thing.
I think we all know that's how Paul explains it in the famous marriage section of Ephesians chapter 5.
Yeah.
So it's not as if this is a ancient truth from the Old Testament, the Torah, that we can now discard, as many seem to want to see it. It would seem a lot of people today would rather see the family destroyed than admit there's this complementary principle
in the family. But what gives the family a peace and a happiness and a
stability.
a stability? Yeah.
The escape clause mentality, Belloches and Wenham and Matthew Henry all take this up. We know that even in the New Testament, some Jews who know all these principles from the Old Testament about covenant commitment and relate their marriages to God's marriage to Israel, still they're looking for a way out of marriage, right?
Yeah.
When they come to
asked
Jesus
Christ
in
about it.
Matthew 19, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And he won't have it. He just says that's not God's plan from the beginning, although because of the hardness of your hearts, he's left you one out in Matthew, and there's not even one out in the other discussion in the other synoptic Gospels.
So he's not making it about whether you love each other, the emotional side of things, or the affection that you have for the person. He doesn't even address that.
No,
it's
he doesn't.
Your obligation. You have made a commitment, a covenant with this person.
Yeah. It's will then. It's not emotion nor affection, right? And certainly not sex. Although these things are all nice. But they're not necessary to a covenant commitment. So here's Wenham and Matthew Henry on the last two verses of Genesis 2.
Wenham says, this does not denote merely the sexual union that follows marriage, or the children conceived in marriage, or even the spiritual and emotional relationship that it involves, though all are involved in becoming one flesh. Rather, it affirms that just as blood relations are one's flesh and bone, so marriage creates a similar kinship relation between man and wife. They become related to each other as brother and sister are. And Matthew Henry says, not made out of his head to rule over him, not out of his feet to be trampled upon by him, but out of his side to be equal with him, under his arm to be protected, and near to his heart to be beloved.
That's a very old-fashioned and sentimental view of marriage, isn't it? But it stood our ancestors in good stead.
Quoted at many marriages, I think, this
Indeed.
sentiment.
But one point you might miss is the Wenham point, that you're not just man and wife. According to the Bible, you are brother and sister. So it's no accident that when marriages end today in divorce, the relationship is completely severed.
Yeah.
And the children aren't the only ones who suffer, but you too.
If you go into the marriage only thinking in terms of the person that you're marrying as your sexual partner, your mate, and there's no connection of responsibility towards them as like brother and sister, you have an obligation towards each other, a spiritual obligation, not just a physical obligation or an emotional obligation. I think without that third element, it's going to be tougher for the marriage, because if either of the other things fail at any given time, when you don't like each other, at least you have the principle of, you have an obligation. You've made a commitment to one another.
And that's why you marry.
In the eyes of God.
Yeah, you marry only in the Lord for that very reason. You start as brother and sister, and then if something else develops from that, great. But you don't lose the relationship of brother and sister.
Right.
So covenant commitment in the Bible, the name of God itself is tied to this idea of an unconditional love.
Yeah. And when you think of it in today's world, it can often be just, well, you're not making me happy anymore. Well, first of all, it shouldn't be all about you. You're not making me happy anymore. There's a problem right there. But would we do that with our children? They don't make us happy, so we toss them? Would we want God to do that with us when we're not lovable?
Making God happy?
Yeah.
With our human perfection, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't want that in other relationships. So we shouldn't accept it in marital relationships.
So you're linking the two discussions of
Marriage.
Marriage.
We did a series on marriage.
and what's the special themes of those?
The first one is JWs and marriage. Do they teach covenant commitment or unconditional love? Is that what the Watchtower teaches?
And the second one's on Jeremiah, isn't it?
Jeremiah.
Yahweh's everlasting love
Right.
for Israel.
And you can follow the links because there were more in that series on marriage.
See you next time.